Hey, if you got this part of the video, you've got the live unedited edition called the coach. No, it's not called the coach. That's my work podcast. Home Gadget Geeks. It is Thursday night. That's the automatic, Dan. That's the automatic thing when I do that. It's Thursday night, October 14th. It's just a smidge before 8 p.m. in the Central Time Zone. If you've caught this video any other time than that, it means you've caught the recorded version, and that's okay. Hang tight. We're in a little bit of pre-show. We start a little bit early here and just kind of wait for the live audience to show up. There's a bunch in the chat room. I already see John and Joe and Brian, and I think I saw Ken a little bit earlier checking in. If you're listening for the first time, if you're coming out and you haven't, there's right above me there's a link. I think, actually on this page, it's down here. There's a link to our YouTube video at work. It's up here. See, I'm having trouble work and this is not separating well tonight. Right below me down here is a link to our YouTube page. That'll take you to the YouTube that has the chat room in it, and we would like to have you join us in there as well. Dan LeFebvre is here, and no, this is not a new look for Mike Uyghur, but Dan LeFebvre is. Hey, Dan, thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'm excited.
We're gonna dig in a little bit to who you are here in the show, but the more important question is: are you a beer guy? Like, do you like beers and craft beers and that kind of stuff? And you got a favorite, or how do you consume the beverage?
I'm a big fan of IPAs.
Okay.
So that's usually my go-to when I go to a brewery or tasting room or something like that. Is I'll start with the IPA. If not that, then like a stout. I mean, Guinness is obviously a go-to.
Guinness is always a good choice, right?
You're I don't judge based on the size of the brewery. If it's good beer, it's good beer. But actually, I used to work for a guy who invested in a local brewery here called Angry Scotsman. They've got some delicious beers.
I love the name. Angry Scotsman.
Angry Scotsman. Yep.
I like it.
Yep.
I like it. And is kind of a smaller boutique place then?
Yeah. It's a small guy. He was I believe he was actually a chemist, and so he puts that training into the beers. Just makes super delicious, always clean.
Nice.
Really good.
Yeah. We've got some here. Omaha is I wouldn't say it's the mecca of micro, because we're close to Boulder. Like, we can't say that here. But we've got some good, and the water is really good. We have a really good water source that out in La Vista, and so a lot of the breweries kind of migrated that direction because the water source was so good, and that's kind of important. A lot of micro breweries are both doing that and spirits if they can.
Yeah.
Of course, that's important. Do you have a spirit that you lean towards? Any favorites?
Rum or maybe whiskey would probably be a close second.
Okay.
But rum first.
Well, here's important on the whiskey: neat or on ice. What do you do? How do you drink your whiskey?
Usually on ice.
Okay.
I like it. Kind of opens it up a little bit more.
Yeah, it does open it. But I am a neat guy.
Really?
I kind of like the complexities that come with the warmth, if you can say it that way. Kind of room temperature, whatever.
Is that kind of across the board? Or are there certain ones you prefer on ice?
No, it depends on. I guess it kind of depends on. If I'm a bourbon guy, so if I'm drinking Jefferson's, which is my favorite, or Blanton's, or Yellowstone, or I'll do even an Old Forester, which is kind of I think is the best of the inexpensive bourbons. No, in a lot of cases, just neat. One of the things is a lot of times I'll drink them with a cigar, and it's going to be a while, so I don't want to water them down too much. But if you get with certain kinds, especially if they're a little bitey, a splash of water in there will calm those down a little bit and kind of change the complexity of their flavors.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That it does get watered down.
If you're doing it for a while. If I'm probably going to be an hour and a half. Cigar, right? And so you kind of go, well, okay, kind of depend. It's one or the other. I do, even with some of the cigars, I kind of change the drinks then, kind of what I want to. Some of the stouts are really good with kind of the Maduro. If they get darker, that's a good way to do it. Some of the lighter ones, even like a light beer, is good. So if you're doing a Connecticut or something along those lines, Pretty good deal. So, rums, and you got a favorite rum that a go-to rum that you kind of like,
I
that's a
mean,
staple?
I know it's kind of a bigger one, but I usually kind of go to something like Kraken,
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
the
Yep.
you
Yeah.
know
No,
black.
it's a good rum. We've kind of fallen in love with Bumbu. Have you ever heard of Bumbu before?
I have not.
Bumbu rum. If you get a chance, it's a little, I wouldn't say it's pricey, but
Okay.
it's not the top, it's not the bottom, it's kind of in the middle, right? Probably
Okay.
$40, 40,
Okay.
$45. Bumbu. They got a couple different varieties. Just get their basic. The best sipping rum that I've ever had. Like
Okay.
yeah, which is kind of rums, like cheaper rums are not known as, hey,
Right. No.
let's just let's just pour this in and say maybe add some Coke to it, right? To kind of break it down a little bit. But yeah, Bumbu, just like it sounds, gotten more popular here in the US, been pretty easy to find. The
Okay.
guys are talking, I have to ask you about this one too. I didn't prepare you for this, but the guys are talking about crypto in the chat room. You a crypto guy? Have you
Yep.
done any crypto? You follow crypto? You got a kind of a favorite?
The Ethereum is my favorite overall.
It's a good call. Good
Yeah.
call. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I've been involved in it for a while. I wish I mined it when Bitcoin first came out. Like I figured out because my older brother and I usually do that when a new tech comes out. We just play with it just to figure it out, right? And so we figured out how to mine, and that was back when it was not an easy thing to do at all.
No.
And but then it was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. This is pointless. So I don't have those wallets anymore. I mean, it was on a laptop, so it probably didn't really get that much anyway. But
yeah, well, you never know. I mean, it's Ethereum's $3,600 right now. Bitcoin's 58,000. Like, it's just ridiculous. We've been talking crypto here for a long time, but
yeah,
it's just kind of crazy. Would you tell well, of course, this is too easy, tell your younger self 4 or 5 years ago, like just it's so hard when you're in the midst of it. I'm doing some hard drive mining kind of crypto. Chia is one of those, and they have a whole bunch of derivatives, and it's not worth anything. Chia is worth something, but the rest of it's not worth anything. But that's what's Ethereum.
yeah,
right? It wasn't worth anything. Even Bitcoin wasn't worth anything. So it's hard. We interviewed a guy back in, I think, 2015. And at the time, Bitcoin was $264. And I thought, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And I even told him that on the show. He ran a Bitcoin ATM here. We had one Bitcoin ATM here in Omaha. He ran it, Edward Weniger. And he said, Jim, just $50 a month, go to the ATM, $50 a month, dollar cost average. You'll thank me. If I had done that, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. No, I probably still would be. So
yeah.
Well,
but that's the thing is, people say that now. It's like, oh, it's too late to get into it, but it's not. Like, I mean, who knows what it'll be in the future? You say that 60,000 when it crossed that, it was like, oh, that's ridiculous. There's no way to go any higher.
Yeah.
I mean, we said that back when it was $100 and $200 and $1,000.
You have a Coinbase account at all? Do you do anything with Coinbase? So that seems to be the easiest.
Yeah,
easiest way to get it done.
It's pretty simple and straightforward.
Yeah. I think it's pretty standard. Pretty standard, right?
They let you accept payments too, so you can go on the podcast website. You can make payments through Coinbase.
Yeah. No, great
for donations.
It's a great. Yeah. Oh, I should probably. We do have an affiliate, theaverageguy.tv/Coinbase. You can get. I think you get on your first $100, you get 10. I get 10 kind of deal. That's we're kind of doing that. But those videos, I think they're up to like $40 that you can make just by watching the videos on there.
It's been a while since I've been in there. I need to
go
in and
you should go back
see if there's any new ones.
Just click through them. Yeah, and that got me. Like Tezos is one that I did the video on, and then I got lucky. Like maybe 2 years ago, I had a whole bunch of these coins, and Tezos was offering like, "Hey, we'll give you 5% interest." Whatever that means, right? So the 5%, in coin, right? So I threw that all in there, whatever. I didn't even think about it. Well, that thing's doubled since I did that. And you're like, well, that's not bad for not knowing what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's those. That's one thing I like about crypto, because there's so many different exchanges, or so many different wallets or things like that. Like
yeah,
just the other day, I found a couple $100 sitting in my Jack's wallet account that I just completely forgotten that I had it, but I still
yeah,
had the backup code, so
good,
covered it, and like, hey,
good, yeah.
free money. It's gone
Hey,
up. Like,
you can't lose. It's hard to lose in this market. Like everything is, you gotta kind of wait.
yeah,
Like,
that's
it
the
comes
tricky
around.
part.
So yeah. The chat room's asking what's the street price for Jim coin these days? Haven't started my own crypto. Maybe I should have. That'd have been a good I could have probably these chia derivatives are pretty easy to get started. And I probably should have done that one. Then Andrew's saying, did Burst go away? So Burst rebranded as Signium. And no, it's
Okay, not
still
familiar
out
with
there
that.
doing. Yeah, Burst was the first of these hard drive mining coins. So
Okay,
instead of GPU nonces being, instead of GPUs running different algorithms all the time, you would plot these algorithms to your hard drive, and then of course, the more hard drive space you had, the more solutions you had. And so when the blockchain would present a problem, it's not exactly that way, but when it would say, "Hey, here's a block, let's encrypt it," it would search everybody's hard drives and whatever one was
interesting.
closest, right? The idea being that hard drives are way more efficient than a GPU, right? Hard drive runs at 5 watts. GPUs run at 300 watts, right? So as the very beginning, Burst was the very beginning of this, and there was a bunch of coins that came out of that. They've all kind of gone by the wayside. And now there's a new like V2
Huh?
hard drive mining 2.0, which is pioneered by this company called Chia, CHIA, just like the Chia
Just like
Pets.
Chica Pets. Yeah.
Yeah. Same idea. You plot, more hard drive space you have, the more solutions you have, the more lottery tickets you have, so to
So is
speak.
that something you'd have to do on an SSD, or could I like pull open my Synology and just
Yeah, no, you can
have
do
a
it on
ton of space on there?
anything. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything. And then the mining software will run on a Raspberry Pi. I mean, they call it farming,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the software will run on a Raspberry Pi. So you don't even need a very powerful. The whole goal is to be green, right? They're trying
Yeah.
to be a green cryptocurrency.
Yeah. I just
So,
didn't know if with the searching, if the speed of the drive would
well,
have an effect on there.
they don't want it too slow. It needs to be 5 seconds for that thing to
Okay.
come back. But I've got a Drobo. I've got some external hard drive enclosures. I've got some various servers. I have an Unraid server. I've put them all over the place, so you can also map. You can map them to different drives in the house, and then
Okay.
point the farmer to any of those locations. It's worked for
Okay.
me. It's
Yeah.
worked for me.
I'll
Check it out.
have to look into
Chia
that.
chia.chia chia.net. Dan, check that out. It's
Okay.
kind of easy.
Yes. I will do
I'll be
that.
honest. You have to have today to get anything. You got to have a lot of space. So you would want to plot and then probably join a pool at that
Okay.
point. But
And I mean, that's the same way it is with the more traditional mining as
yeah,
well. And, these days you're not going to get a lot, but not a lot right now. In 10
no,
years,
no, yeah,
you know,
yeah. You
who
never
knows?
know. We never thought Bitcoin would be where it's at. So,
Exactly.
all right, guys, thanks for joining us. Let's go ahead and get this thing kicked off and get going. We got a lot to talk about tonight. So here we go. This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Home Gadget Geeks show number 508, recorded on October 14th, 2021. Here on Home Gadget Geeks, we cover all the favorite tech gadgets that find their way into your home. News, reviews, product updates, and conversation. A lot of conversation tonight, all for the average tech guy. I'm your host, Jim Collison, broadcasting live from the AverageGuy.tv studios here in a beautiful Bellevue, Nebraska. Dan LeFebvre is with us tonight. Dan, how's the weather? We always kick off the show with weather. You're a little south of me. How's the weather down there? Is it all right? It's fall's on its way?
Yep. Yeah, I'm in Oklahoma City, and fall is definitely on the way. Just a couple days ago, we had tornado roll through and
Mm-hmm.
hail, and so
It's
Tornado
not over
Alley.
yet.
It's got kind of how.
It's not over yet. A lot of listeners down in that area through this heartland corridor, as we think of Dallas and Oklahoma City through Topeka up in here to Omaha, Kansas City would fall into that as well. Are you a warm weather guy? Are you a cold weather guy? Where do you land in the spectrum?
Honestly, I spend most of my time inside anyway. We're so
We'll talk about that here in just a
so
second.
climate control.
You don't care. You don't care.
I'm really kind of indifferent. I guess maybe if I had to pick one, I'd probably go more warm weather. But
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'm a cold weather guy. I do not like being hot. And so I enjoy when this fall is my favorite time because it means cold
Yeah.
weather's coming.
Well, I guess for me, it's more the precipitation side of it. With cold weather,
Mm.
you tend to get snow and ice, and down here, they don't really know how to deal with that. So,
Yeah.
whereas if it's hot, you just have to crank the AC in the car a little more. It's not going to affect
And
travels.
you guys get a lot more ice than we do.
Right.
We just don't. Kansas City they get the worst part of the ice.
Yes.
They get it bad. So, well, of course, we'll produce this and post a show with world-class show notes. There'll be a few out there at theaverageguy.tv. Just a reminder, Mike Uyghur out again for the second week in a row. No, I haven't fired Mike. He's just been busy doing some stuff with the family. John Aidlott spent some time with us last week. Big thanks to John. Got me excited about bicycles and not riding them across the country like he did, but electric bicycles, something I'm kind of thinking about. So, John, thanks for coming on the show as well. Introduced him a little bit earlier, but Dan LeFebvre from Based on a True Story podcast.com. That's a mouthful to get out. I have to remember that every Saturday morning. So Dan has sponsored the mug out at Ask the Podcast Coach. If you join us on Saturday mornings at 9:30 Central, Dan has been the mug sponsor for Based on a True Story podcast.com. Dan, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I've been a big fan for a while.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's get to know you a little bit. Listen, first of all, if you're watching the video, you've got the biggest nerd setup behind you, geekery going on. Listen, I saw it and I was like, oh man, after my kids give me a hard time, my wife a hard time about having 9 monitors down here, but you have it as well. Give us a quick, while people are looking at us, give us a quick studio tour there. What do you have behind you?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll see if I can point correctly. So this computer is for that monitor, and go the other way, that right there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a graphics tablet to draw on.
Okay, so that's like for your graphic design, for the work that you do, some of those kinds of things. That's a work computer.
Yeah. So I one of the things I do is I teach Photoshop courses online, and so like compositing and stuff, and sketching and painting and stuff. So so that's that. I use that essentially as kind of entertainment, something on in the background while I'm working, things like that. This over here is my PC laptop that also is a Wacom tablet as well, so I can sketch on that. And then those,
you got dual monitors with RGB lighting behind them, right?
Yes.
Some pink RGB lighting behind it.
Yep, and I can change the color, of course. You can do with any RGB these days. So depends on what the mood is for the day.
Yeah. Do you have it connected? Here's the important part: is it connected to one of the device? One of the assistants, so you can tell the assistant set the mood and it changes the color?
It is, but I'll be honest, and I haven't gone through setting up like the different moods for all of it together. Like I can just tell it what color I want it to be, but I haven't taken the time to set up the actual different scenarios and things like that for it.
Okay.
But those three are connected to this computer right here, which is my primary work system. That one's also, that's a Cintiq. I'm pointing the wrong way. That's a Cintiq there. And then I have a MacBook Pro there as well.
Nice. So that's three computers or four?
Four. The 2 laptops, and then one Windows, one Mac, and then that. And then of course the computer I'm on right here too is.
Yeah, so that now you're facing us. We're seeing that behind you. So is this like, then you have your podcast set up? Is this where you do your podcasting from?
So I learned pretty early on that if I'm recording on the same thing that I'm editing on, I make changes to settings, and that tends to come back to bite me when I'm recording. So this computer is only for recording. I don't touch it. In between, I record and then dump things off to my primary computer.
Mac or PC on that one, on the record?
It's a PC. It's an all-in-one. I went to Best Buy and got a refurbished open box, cheap. Don't need much to record audio. So
no. Now video's different story, but your video looks great. So we're getting good. Do you, if you have a preference of buy versus build, would you rather build it, or do you kind of is just buying what's available the best for you?
So that the green one there, my secondary computer, that's one that I built. and then I think I built in 2012, and then I've upgraded it numerous times since then. The other one is a custom build from CyberPower. I built a computer for a family member, and went to turn it on, and nothing.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't have extra motherboards or power supplies or any of this stuff around to find out what the issue is. So I sent it all back and was like, it's not worth the time to figure that out.
Yeah, some of us really like the challenge, right?
Sure.
And of like figuring it out and getting it pulled together. I also, I mean, I kind of a hybrid. I've got some built. I've bought some from work. One thing that's great about Gallup is the older equipment, they kind of let it go for, $20, whatever, right? And so you can get some. I mean, I picked up a fairly old Core i7, maybe it was probably 8 years old when I got it for $25. But with today's computer equipment, like, it lasts a lot longer than it used to. So you can throw it in the corner, do some things with it. Audio and video work just fine if you're going to do it that way. What kind of microphone are you using there then for
this is stuff? The SE Electronics V7. Okay. So it's essentially SE Electronics, their version of the SM58.
Yeah, it sounds good. It's in the, so price range wise, is that like in the $199 to?
I think it was like $100.
Oh, okay. So the $99 range.
Yeah, so super cheap. Okay. I used to have when I first started the show, I used a Rode. Can't remember if it was the NT1 or the NT1A, but that was the condenser mic that was like $400, and I got it for like half price. So I used that. It was great. Loved it for a while, but then a storm knocked out my DBX 286S, and it was because I had to use that for the noise gate since it was a condenser. So it was a matter of switching to. I decided to switch to a dynamic.
Yeah, no, these are easier. Just to be honest, they're easier mics to, I think, to wield. And to use. They don't pick up as much background noise and I think they're most impressive on Zoom calls. So you join a company Zoom call, and they're like, what are you doing?
Yep.
So it's oftentimes I'm like, do I want it? Because I too, I have my podcasting and kind of home rig here, and then if you pivot this way, all my work stuff is here. So 6 monitors this way, 4 monitors this way, right?
That sounds like I have a few more to get to catch up.
Well, I have an obsession, Dan. No, don't try to keep up. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. But both, they all have their, and I'm sure this is true for you too. They all have their purpose. And I don't know about you, and I bet you feel this way too. I need to see, like, I want to have Slack up, and I want to have Twitter up, and I want to have things I'm monitoring. I got the cameras up, the Ring cameras are up. For me, I want to see everything. It's not enough. If it's hidden, it's gone. Yep. I kind of, are you the same way? Do you like things kind of where you can see them?
Yep. Each monitor has a purpose.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, and some people go like, well, that's kind of a waste. You could be doing multiple things on a monitor. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to.
Yeah.
I want one thing because I want to do it all the time, and I want to do it really well.
I will say my biggest exception to that is when I'm writing for the podcast. I do find it's easier than just because of Word's UI to split the screen. So I'll have 2 Word documents on the same screen. Yeah. And then on the other screen, I can have research materials or whatever it is, on the web browser, that kind of thing that I'm doing. But that's kind of probably my biggest exception to that.
Yeah.
In other words, yeah.
Yeah. And I do a lot of customer support stuff. So I'll have the portal up. I might have a supporting website that I need for that. And I might have, a browser window open, an email on the other one. I want to see them all at the same time, and that's still not enough monitors because I've got a Word doc and a text doc open. I could do 2 more if I wanted to. So, well, super impressive setup. We talked about your podcast, Based on a True Story podcast. You can find it. I put it in the chat room, but based on a true story podcast.com if you want to check it out. What got you and the podcast is kind of what it sounds like. It is really, you talk to the experts. So there's and I want to say movie, but you've done some TV shows, you've done some media things, right? So we'll call them movies for now, because that's the easiest thing to remember. Like Band of Brothers. That wasn't really a movie, but right? Okay, so we'll call them movies for now. But what got you thinking? You're 180 some episodes in at this point, I think. What got you into this interest of like, okay, how do we flesh out? Because we all know movies have a variety of truth in them. Sometimes very close, sometimes not close at all. What got you into doing a podcast like this?
So I used to work for a company that taught the software for movies and games for feature film. So like, Maya and 3ds Max and, the software that's used by like Pixar and stuff. And so I ran the content marketing team there. And as a lot of tech companies do, you have like a hack day and try to figure out new ideas, ways we can grow. One of the guys on my team was like, well, why don't we start a podcast? We were running a blog and that's super popular. And we have access to talking to some of these people that work on movies and games. So we started a branded podcast, and I ran that for about a year until that office was completely shut down. And so obviously the podcast didn't exist anymore. But at that point I decided I love this podcasting thing. I want to do something. And just kind of, I've always been a fan of history and kind of my background with knowledge of movie production and stuff. It kind of seemed like a natural fit. I can tell you the story of when I actually came up with the idea was because of Les Mis, which I mentioned on that episode. Went to go see the musical with my wife at the time. And on the way back, it was just how much of what I just watched actually happened. And so when I was thinking about podcast ideas, when I knew I wanted to do a podcast, think about podcast ideas, that conversation popped in my head. And I was like, if I'm doing that on the way back, I bet there's other people that are doing that too. Maybe this could be a viable idea for a show. And then I just started doing some research to see if it actually would be, if there would be enough movies to cover. Turns out there's a lot of them. So
yeah.
So
and there'll continue to be more,
right? Continue to be more. Yeah.
Jim Shoemaker in our chat room. I didn't realize this. He says I listened to every based on a true story.
Oh, awesome!
I'm a Patreon supporter. Love it. And
Thanks,
so
Jim.
Jim, thanks for saying that. Okay. So part of it though is what's the truth and what's a lie, right? And you do this little segment on there called two truths and a lie. Mm-hmm. So we've come up. Hopefully, are you okay? Did you find three? Okay.
Yeah.
So we have three. We have three things about Dan. He's going to say those here in a second. Let's do it like you're on your podcast. And at the end of the show, we'll get the chat room to see if they can figure out what was the truth, what was the truth, and what was the lie. So, Dan, what do you got for us?
Okay. I will say, I'll list them off as 1, 2, and 3. So number 1, my podcast is always streamed live.
Okay.
Number 2, I used to teach the artists that make movies and games.
Okay.
Number 3, I'm a full-time podcaster and I also teach online courses.
Okay, let's go over those one more time. So number one,
my podcast is always streamed live.
Always streaming live. Okay. Number 2.
2, I used to teach the artists that make movies and games.
Okay.
And number 3, I'm a full-time podcaster and I also teach online classes.
All right. We gave some of that away in the intro already. So that's okay.
Usually I do the 2 truths and a lie first. That's
right. Right. No worries. No worries. We'll so listen to those. We'll kind of come back here at the end and talk about it. What as you think about the whole body of work that you've done, and if you were to give a percentage of like, are movies more lies or more it's theater? Let's not call it lies. Right. Let's call it theater, right? Because that's really what it is. Are they more in most cases, are they more theater than they are fact, or do you get a feel for that, or does it just kind of depend?
It really kind of depends. So like you're saying, it is not I mean, I call it 2 truths and a lie, but it's very creative. One of I was talking to, I'm trying to remember who it was I was talking to. One of the historical consultants that I talked to, he said it very, very well. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically he's saying his job as a historical consultant is to tell the director on the movie, this is what actually happened. And then they make the decision to make a conscious decision to turn away from that or to follow that. And a lot of them, It's going to depend on the story. Yeah, I can give an example of an episode that is not out yet, but it will be. I talked to the creator and the showrunner on the History Channel's Project Blue Book, and I talked to them about like what is it like to create a show, not a movie, but a TV show that is based on true events, but not only that, but also based on aliens and UFOs that nobody believes and all this stuff, and government conspiracies and cover-ups and things like that. So there's going to have to be there's going to have to be a lot more of the creative side to fill in some of those holes than something like Apollo 13, where I spent hours and hours and hours reading the actual transcripts of everything going back and forth because it's all logged and NASA has everything on their website.
Do you feel like you have to bring some of that research to the podcast? You often have experts that are on with you. How ready do you feel like you need to be when you're going into the recording? Do you feel like you have to be an expert on it as well?
Not necessarily. So if you listen to the back catalog of episodes, there's actually 2 different types of episodes that I do. When I first started the show, I did it part-time as just a thing alongside a full-time job. And so interviewing people was not something that I did very often. Just the logistics of scheduling, as I'm sure you're well aware, can be difficult to do. So I decided, well, what's something that I can do? I can create all of this on my own free time, whenever, and then, not really tied to any sort of a specific timeline. So those episodes are all solo narrative, and I do all the research and all that. So I have to know a lot more going into that. When I'm doing an interview, I actually specifically try to only know, like, if I watch this movie or watch this show, and then I think that this all happened. So I'm going into it with that. I'm not doing much research beforehand. I mean, obviously watch the movie and probably a little bit more than most people do to prep for the interview. But I try to come at it as a viewer of the movie, wondering those questions, and so I can start to discover that along the way as I'm talking to these experts.
Yeah, there is some discovery. We were talking a little bit in pre-show about this. There's some value in kind of discovering on the show as you're doing the interview, right? That kind of makes it feel genuine. Do you think that's true?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I do send all questions ahead of time so the guest knows, kind of where we're going.
I sent you 0 questions, Dan.
No. Well, I feel like I kind of have to, because, well, a lot of the guests, they want to make sure that they don't say things that, especially if they actually worked on the movie, they want to make sure they don't say anything. But I also always organize the episode in the order of the movie, so kind of following the movie's timeline. And so if they know kind of what the high points are that we're going to hit on, then they can come prepared. Hopefully, some like the Imitation Game episode. They did some research. That he had the historian at Bletchley Park do some research to answer one of the questions. So
I find it. So what I do for work is very similar, except we do more research at work before we do the podcast. And I'm actually finding I do like having some notes that I'm following, even though I make it feel like it's impromptu. I make it feel like we're just floating out there, kind of following, meandering with the universe, so to speak. But it's in some cases it's very planned. I think the trick is to just not make it feel too forced.
Right.
In that, right? When you give them too much. Jim chimes in. He says he's often bought the DVDs after listening to an episode. Like Band of Brothers series, often the DVDs are really cheap, maybe even used on Amazon, right? A great way. Probably even streaming. You may be able to, because you're not necessarily the newest movies, right? It's sometimes movies that are a couple years old. Maybe it's even going back a decade, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've done movies. I covered the Wake Island movie that was made during World War II in 1942, so it was still released during the war. Yeah. And the guy that I talked to on that, basically wrote the definitive book on that battle. So he was super, super informative, but we also got into, like, this movie was made during the war, and so it is going to be part propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, just realistically, that's
go back and watch some of the movies from the mid 40s through the mid 50s. They're painful. Like you just kind of like, that stuff would never go today.
No,
but a completely different day, right? And that, do you find for older movies, do you have trouble finding experts to come on, or do you find it easy to find experts because they've been out there for so long?
It really kind of varies.
Okay.
So my process is usually, if I know that this is a movie I want to cover, I try to find who I think would be the best person to talk about that. Um, and if I can't get them on, or if they don't agree to come on the show, I'm not going to do all the interview prep and all that kind of stuff beforehand. So at any given time, I've got dozens of movies that are kind of,
Hmm.
if when I hear back from this person and able to get it scheduled, then that's when I'll do the research and actually turn it into an episode. So
Yeah.
it's not quite as scheduled that way. I guess it's a lot of it is based on when I can get to talk to
So
somebody.
you got kind of an idea of some
Hmm.
things you want to cover, and then you probably put some feelers out for maybe some guests or whatever. And when, like Hollywood, sometimes when those guests become available is when you can actually, have you ever had any trouble getting, like, sometimes guests can be a little demanding. It's like, especially if they're kind of famous. Have you had any brush with fame, or had any trouble getting guests? Because sometimes they say yes and then they reschedule, right? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Has that been a problem at all?
Um,
No names. You don't have to mention any names.
no, I mean, usually, when they're up there, usually I'm actually working with like their PR person or something.
Okay.
So a great example, again, this episode is not out yet, but it will be in a few weeks. Uh, I talked to Stephen Nafee, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize winning biography on Vincent van Gogh, and emailed him directly to see if he wanted to come on the show. He has a brand new book coming out in the beginning of November, so he's like, "Yeah, this will be a great opportunity. Let me hand you off to my PR person." So we actually scheduled all that stuff,
Hmm.
and so a lot of times it's kind of that, and knowing that maybe you can't get in touch with the person directly, but usually they're going to have an agent or somebody that's going to handle all that for them, and working with that. So
Do you ever get surprised? And this happens to me sometimes. Do you ever get surprised? Like, you think a guest is going to be tough, and you get talking to them, and they're just easy. This is going to be great, or maybe the reverse. Like, you're
I,
thinking, go-
yeah, and a lot of that's
again, no names.
not well. I can say one of the names that has nothing to do with the guest is 100% my research
Mm,
uh, beforehand,
mhm,
um, and it was Dr. Zahi Hawass, the renowned Egyptologist.
mm.
I had him on to talk about the old classic Cleopatra movie, and I went through my normal process, did all the research, basing it on the movie and all this kind of stuff. And pretty early on in the interview, he's like, "Well, we don't really know much about Cleopatra. Most of this is based on Shakespeare." So I'm like, "So
Ah.
that answers all the rest of my questions."
And you're like, oh
Yeah.
no, what do I do? What'd you do? How'd you handle the rest of the interview?
Well, I mean, I always come with some extra questions as
Mm,
kind of backups and things like that, just
yeah.
in case. I don't always get to them, but in that case, I certainly did. And kind of fortunately, he was a super busy guy. If you ever seen a documentary on ancient Egypt, he's the one that's in it. So super busy guy. So he only could give me half an hour of his time anyway. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was
Got
pretty
it,
quick and
got
good.
it, and got it done. I've kind of avoided, I'll be honest with you, I avoid, kind of the famous tech folks, just because I don't wanna deal with that. One, we record Thursday nights, so it's impossible to get them in a lot of cases. Early on, I would do some interviews where I'd pre-record them and then bring them on, and at the end of the day, I was just like, you know what? This is the Average Guy Network.
Hmm.
I'm gonna kind of focus on the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
Just and have them focus on. So listeners and folks in the tech space that are trying to have a new product they're trying to get out there, some of those kinds of things. And we've made some really good friends that way. Do you have any speaking of that, do you have any folks like you've used a couple times because they've been such a great guest?
Oh yeah, you're talking about the Band of Brothers episode. So that's
Yeah.
Marty Morgan. Um, he came on to talk about The Longest Day first, and then he came on
Mm,
to talk about Saving Private Ryan, and then
mhm.
we did 3 interviews for Band of Brothers, and the current series that's going on right now is also The Pacific, which is kind of HBO's. Um, follow up to Band of Brothers.
Are you mostly a World War II guy, or do you get all over?
I specifically try to not only be World War II, because the entire podcast could just be World War II. But like it was Stephen Nafy, I was talking about Vincent Van Gogh and and art history and stuff. So, and like with the Project Blue Book, like I mentioned that, so try to balance around a lot.
You did Bohemian Rhapsody, which is right. So I mean, that would kind of be modern. That would be modern day. The thing, the part of that movie that's I guess is famous now is I think it's the REM guy, the record label guy, who is Mike Myers, who is represented by Mike Myers. Apparently, it was in a good example of what you talked about earlier. One person encapsulating maybe 4 or 5 conversations with the record company on that. For the movie's sake, they bring that into one like it's just easier and more entertaining for us to see that in a single person, or opposed to multiple. That's a movie where I've maybe it's 60-70% accurate. You did the review. Do you remember more accurate than less, more entertainment than less? Do you remember it all on that?
I think, episode? As I recall, my kind of walking away with that was of the stuff that they showed, it was pretty accurate. And a lot of movies do this, like you're talking about, they'll use composite characters and merge people together. Or another huge thing that they do is just change the timeline, so you don't get to see a lot of the things that actually did connect the dots in between the plot points that you do see. But I mean, again, it's a movie. It's got to be entertaining, and that was the end of the day. A lot of the historical consultants I've talked to, they're like, it's a movie, and if nobody's going to watch this, what's the point? Like, it's end of the day, it has to put people in the seats, so has to follow some of those common storylines.
Well, they made huge strides to make think about the ending where, and no spoilers here, I won't give any spoilers. But if I do, you should have watched it by now.
That's kind of my thought process. In most of the movies, if you haven't seen it by now, you
should have. Whether at Live Aid, they took meticulous, attention to detail, to match those up. And you can watch these on YouTube where they show the movie versus the real, and it is super, super close. And even some of the actors are very, very, very close to looking like them, right? And yet some of the details, we consolidated this in a little bit. We Freddie Mercury was maybe not as in bad of shape as the movie made it look. They needed to create a little drama at the end there, right? Type deal. So
I mean, you gotta have that drama in there again, otherwise nobody's gonna watch it.
Well, it's still a very entertaining movie, I think, in that same genre. And I don't think you've done this one, but the Elton John is it Rocket Man? It's the same kind of genre, much more. I mean, it's more of a musical than it is a movie. But definitely autobiographical in that sense. Another one you did cover in episode 98, you covered Pirates of the Silicon Valley, and that'd be of a lot of interest because in this community, I've been doing this for 10 or 11 years, Mac versus PC has been, and it just recently in the last couple of years has really, I mean, you have both PC and Mac. Do you care anymore? You use the tool that you need, right?
I will say, so I have a PC and Mac now. That's new as of a few months ago. And for a long time I did not really do anything with Apple products. I just didn't pay for them. I worked in studios where they would use Apple products, but honestly, it was like I can get the same sort of power for a lot less. I'm a cheapskate. So it was just kind of outside, but recently I have been getting into, I got the new iPhone, switched over from Android. So,
well, listen, hey, I was a PC guy for the longest, and I'm still a PC guy. Like most of my computers are PC, right?
Yeah.
Recently purchased the M1. I just had a lot of M1 envy. I had to see what this new chip was all about. The M2s are going to be even better. And my daughter's been talking, she's going to need another computer. And I was like, well, maybe you'll get the M1 and I'll order the M2, type of deal, having that conversation. I really enjoyed it. Was Android, or was a Windows phone guy for a while. And then Android, I did the Palm OS, and eventually I think with the iPhone 6 kind of landed on the iPhone. Right before that, I'd had an Android phone that heated up to the temperature of the sun every time I used it. Like, and when I traveled, I'd get 3 hours of battery life. And I was like, this is dumb. Like so I switched over to the iPhone. I've never looked back, but for me, it's really all about what works, right? Like what's working for me. So I'm assuming if you're on iPhone, and to be honest with you, there's not a ton of difference, right? Between an Android device and an iPhone. We've kind of, even between the Mac, and you're doing both, between a Mac and a PC, do you really see that big of a difference anymore? Like when you get on a Mac, do you think like, oh, I'm on a Mac? It's kind of like, okay, I need to do what I'm doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. There's really not that much of a difference. The biggest difference is just the MacBook is not as powerful as my desktop, and that would be the same same for any computer that way. So yeah, there's really not that much of a difference.
And this show was a while ago, the one that you did. It was I'm not going to ask you to come back with all the details, but again, as you're thinking about that more sensationalized than, because there was listen, I grew up in the Silicon Valley when this was happening. I lived in the Valley. I was down the street from where HP was founded. I was 5 miles from Wozniak's garage, right?
Oh, wow.
I was there when this was up. My dad worked for IBM, right? I was in there, right? And we didn't hear all these things. So was the movie a little more sensationalized, from what you remember, to make the story work?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a big part of that too was it was a made for TV movie, so the budget was a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And really until more recently, I think that movie was 97, 98. I think really until more recently, some of those people just didn't really talk about it. Like Bill Gates just didn't really talk about Apple and Steve. I mean, he's not that he still does. You can find some quotes out there. I've got some of those in the episode. But I think for a long time, they just didn't really talk about that a lot. And that, I'm sure, fueled some of that Mac versus PC as well, He said, she said type thing, who are you going to believe?
Well, and a lot of movies recently on Jobs, right? I mean, on Steve Jobs, and we've seen some books, and a lot of things are coming. He was a very secretive person, and so just a lot of that stuff was not going to come out kind of during those times. It's taken some time for it to roll. Bill Gates has had some problems of his own as of late, and so we're starting to hear more of those kinds of things. I think there was also, if I think about the time, you haven't done this one, but there was that movie, The Net, Sandra Bullock, which was like,
speaking of movies that don't age well with tech.
You look back and you're like, oh my God, that is awful. Like that doesn't work that way at all.
Yeah. I always like to point to Jurassic Park, where like they're fixing the locks on the doors, and she's like, oh, this is a Linux system, I know this, and it's like this 3D interface, like old 3D interface, and you're like, no. No.
You're like, that's not really true. That's not the well. And I even think as we think of like Star Trek, the original, right? And what they thought technology was going to be like, right? And so they're still using push buttons and switches, right? By the time we get to Next Generation, there's a lot of, now we're kind of thinking, and that actually has kind of aged better than the original series, right? The tech out of that, you can kind of watch now. That the outfits are terrible. Let's just be clear. Like the Next Generation outfits. Are you techie at all? Do you watch Star Trek? Are you a Trekkie at all?
I've watched it. That was my family growing up was super religious, so we wouldn't really watch much TV growing up. So I didn't really grow up with it, but I've watched it since then.
So they get a little bit closer, and then of course some of the episodes since some of the, I think of Deep Space Nine and some of those, and then even looking at some of the tech, the Star Wars tech has gotten, as we've gotten, all of a sudden R2D2 could fly, and you're like, who Who would have thought? You've done the Lord of the Rings though, right? On your
Mhm.
podcast, have you gone back and looked at those? Have you gone back and looked at the Star Wars? Well, that won't be historical, and neither would Lord of the
Well,
Rings. So how did you do those?
those were April Fool's episodes. So for on
That
April
makes sense.
1st, yeah, that was just honestly, I just love Lord of the Rings. So
That's a great. That's a great. I was like, wait a minute. Those
yeah,
are,
no,
although
so
in our house, Lord of the Rings is historical for sure. It
yes,
really
yes.
happened at our house.
So the kind of the shtick that I did with that was I pretended like the book was the history. So how
Yeah,
much they changed from the book to the movies. That was kind of the comparison there.
yeah,
But yeah, there's
yeah. Did you do that one with somebody, or was that just you that you
no,
did?
that was before I started doing this full time. So those were all the individual solo
Yeah.
episodes.
Yeah. Star Trek, listen, that whole there's a whole canon that's gigantic for that. And there are people who already are looking ahead like the opposite direction like, well, when is Jonathan Archer? I mean, he's going to be born here pretty quick cuz it like Star Trek said it was true. And you just kind of like, "Oh gosh. Yeah, no, you're maybe taking that a little too seriously." You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't done a lot of research into it, but one episode I thought would be fun to do is like some real tech that came out of
Oh
Star
yeah.
Trek and some
Yeah.
real tech that came out of, like the other way
Yes.
around,
Yeah.
and I obviously haven't done that yet, but I think that would be fun
Yeah,
to do.
no, you would get. I mean, I'm a Trek fan, so I've seen them all, studied them, that, and certainly I remember in Next Generation them having handheld, on my phone. I guess my phone's in my pocket. Them having these handheld devices, which we didn't have. This would have been I got to Germany in '86, so this would have been 87, 87, 88, and they're doing things, on a thing like this.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Like, well,
Yeah.
here we are. The reality is though they're not staring at them 24/7 like we do, right? We're on these things all the time. They're only using them. The other thing I thought was like they would be doing these complex computations on them, like astrophysics, and I was like, there is no way that thing could do astrophysics. And then you're kind of like, well, now I mean
Oh.
today you're like, well, I guess they could.
I mean, I would prefer to do that on many monitors than my small phone, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it was funny, in the original series, Spock would always look into and they did that so they didn't have to show anything. Like, cause
Mhm.
they kind of hit it on purpose. By the time we get to Next Generation, they're showing these things, these animations now that kind of make more sense. I was trying to think, but there are those things we think about, like Back to the Future. They had those shoes, and there were that would self lace, and
Yeah.
somebody and like last year, I think they were due by last year because that's when they showed up on the movie. Somebody made them,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's always interesting when in all the Terminator movies that some of them are set in, I think one of them is set in 2018. Right. I mean, so they made it at some point and then they're thinking, well, oh, yeah, it always seems closer than it actually is. You get there, oh, 2063. And like all of a sudden we're there and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't the same. So you're not, you don't do a lot of those forward facing movies at all, or the movies that are going back in time for stuff, more historical stuff. Right.
Yeah, I mean, based on a true story. So it's, I mean, with the
Right.
exception of Lord of the
Right.
Rings, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
Any other thoughts on when you've done like, okay, you did the right stuff,
Hmm.
right? And that there's a big in this community, there's a big lot of fans of NASA and some of those. How did that fare? That was all that stuff was fairly secretive in its day, right? I mean, we weren't public. How did that fare once they started putting that was a TV series, right? That they put together, right? Wasn't that, or was that a movie?
I thought it
Remember?
was a movie straight on.
Okay. It
Yeah.
could be. It could be.
Um, as I recall on that one, I mean, again, like most of the main points, because yeah, I mean, it was secretive then, but documented since then. Um, as I recall, it did a pretty decent job as far as movies do. I
Okay.
mean, but
Yeah.
I will say that episode is the first time I got turned down for an interview.
Oh,
Like they
really?
actually replied and said no. Yep.
Bummer. How'd
Yep.
that make you feel?
I mean, it was Chuck Yeager, so I was like, okay, I get it. Like he didn't want to do the interview.
Yeah.
But he replied. He was super nice.
Would you think it was him or PR that replied?
That's a good question. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, can't really. I mean, it was a short enough email that it didn't really feel markety or PR type, but yeah, you never know.
Do you find there are more, like, there are areas or sectors that are more friendly than others? Like, are book authors a little more friendly than movie stars or directors? Does that matter?
I mean, I don't think. I mean, everybody I've talked to has been really, really nice. I will say, like, book authors, if they have a book coming out, then they tend to be more time based. Like, it matters more when it is released. Others, like with the Pacific, Marty Morgan, he actually worked on that series. But as he revealed in one of the episodes, I can't remember if it's one that's already out yet or not, but he was like, he didn't have a good relationship when that ended, and so he hadn't gone back to watch the series that he worked on until interviewing for the show. So it's kind of interesting in that way, but yeah, everybody's just been really, really nice.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, everybody I've talked to, they're all great.
Yeah, they're and willing to come on. It's a podcast. Has podcasting has gotten more popular, so to speak? Has it gotten any easier, or is it harder to get guests to come on?
I think honestly, 2020 made it easier. Okay. Because a lot of people had things postponed or whatever, and they were sitting around at home. It also made it easier for the tech side. A lot more people understand. I use Squadcast to record, but I basically tell them it's Zoom, but it has better quality audio. Oh, okay, I get that. And you click on the link and it takes you there, and it's pretty well set up. More people are familiar with using mics and and webcams and things. I mean, I don't do the video side. I record it all and then edit afterwards. But
more people are just using them. It used to take me, when I was doing interviews for work, I would schedule 30 minutes ahead of the live time.
Oh, yeah.
Just to make sure. And man, I'd use all 30 minutes. Like,
oh, really?
A few years ago. Yeah, troubleshooting sound. And lately, we're set up in 5 minutes, and then we stare at each other for 25. And I was for the other day, I was thinking I should change that to 15. That I had that thought that morning. I did a podcast, and took us 35 minutes to get. We were 5 minutes late because of one sound issue, and I was like, nope, gonna leave at 30. That's the smart way to go, especially live, because we're gonna get we recruit an audience to come out and join us, and I don't want to disappoint them and such. Dan, when you think about a World War II, since I know you don't do everything World War II, but you've done a lot of World War II, what if you think about what you reviewed that may be the most accurate or the truest to that genre, like, or the closest? That's probably the best. I hate that word true in this sense, but the closest, most accurate, whatever. Is there, or do you have a favorite in that area that you kind of lean towards? You go, yeah, I really like this movie or this work for World War II.
That's a really good question, because with something like that, World War II movies, their biggest, I don't want to say the word failure because it is creative decisions, but they usually it's going to be all timeline based. Yeah. Like, oh, that didn't actually happen here, or that battle that they show taking place for like 5 minutes, that was actually 60 days. Or like the landing scene, the beaches of D-Day and Saving Private Ryan. Everyone's like, oh, that's what it was like. I talked to Marty about that. He's like, yeah, that's what it was like in the bloodiest part of that. But like 150 yards over here, there's practically no resistance. Mm-hmm. Or this beach over here, like the guns weren't facing that way, so there wasn't as much resistance. Or so. Yeah, that's another aspect of it, that especially when it comes to war movies, not only do they, tell a story, but you got to have some violence in there. And so they're going to pick the most violent parts of it. And
well, I mean, it's at the end of the day, they got to sell tickets, right?
I mean,
I think of the old Tora versus the new Midway. Same
Yes, I did cover
covering
that
the
one.
covering. You did? Did you cover
Uh,
Midway?
I did cover Midway, yeah,
Okay.
with the guy that wrote the book on it. Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Hmm.
I
Craig
so
Simons.
not well. Okay, and then we compare it to what was the one with Ben Affleck,
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor, right? Not necessarily critically acclaimed, right? And I actually I liked Midway better. I
Yeah.
liked now I don't know how accurate it was.
You know, he actually, when I talked to Craig, he said that was
Pretty
pretty accurate. I
yeah.
mean, there were times, even to times of some of the things that seemed like, oh, this must be a Hollywood moment, that this plane happened to, I think it was a dive bomb or something like that, just
Yeah.
happened to hit the right. It's like, no, that happened. Like,
That's
I mean,
well, that's
sometimes,
great. It changed the way I looked at dive bombing. I never really thought like these guys, we were throwing crap planes out there. I mean, they were terrible. And literally like spare skins and stone knives. Like I mean, they would pull a lever. Then they'd have a mechanical aiming thing that I mean, they were just hoping they could get close enough to this thing to drop the bomb so it'd stick and then pull up
and then
in
pull
time,
out. Yeah.
and the flaps would come out. And what I appreciated about Midway was just the cinematography of it
Yeah.
to really show. First of all, I'm super afraid of heights, so that made me queasy the whole time I was watching it. Right, but just kind of that. I'm glad to hear you say that it was fairly accurate because I was like, wow,
Hmm.
this was pretty amazing and a pretty amazing day in the war. I mean,
Yeah.
a pivotal like a very pivotal day in that whole in the whole conflict. And so it's I appreciated that where Pearl Harbor was uh accurate or not, and it wasn't at all like I don't think at all. There was I mean it
Pearl
happened on
Harbor is a
December
place.
7th.
There was an attack. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Did
Yeah.
you do Pearl Harbor as well? Did you cover that one?
Um, I kind of I did one with a fellow podcaster, kind of as a Pearl Harbor Day. Like, which one would you rather see? Tora, Pearl Harbor. We went kind of back and forth on some of that, but I haven't really covered it in depth. There are some of the historians that I have talked to that have just flat out and said that's the one movie I'm not going to talk about.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so, but
Well, I really appreciated as a kid, Tora was the one kind of the one I would look
yeah,
towards as kind of the as close as we didn't know, but it was one I respected, I guess, from that standpoint. So when I got a chance to see
yeah.
Midway, I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah, I thought
interesting.
Midway was well done. I think it's one of those, as an example of them kind of picking some of the more, um, what's the right word? The bigger parts
Yeah.
of that
Yeah.
conflict. I mean, Midway obviously was huge. I can't remember the exact phrase that Craig said, but something like, there are 10 minutes in there that the course of the war changed, like
Yeah.
from we're losing to now we're kind of winning, and
Yeah.
as far as that goes. But
Well, and it was
yeah.
I mean, this is a multi-day.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah. It
mean,
was
it's a
not a
multi-day campaign. You can't, they show that in the course of 2 hours, but in it really, it kind of went, I mean, the drama in that, you don't need to make
Mhm.
it up.
Yeah.
Just the drama of in the morning, it didn't for the United States, the morning didn't look good. We were down 38 to
Right.
nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And then the afternoon and evening are a completely different story. And so it's just a different, it was just for me, like I really appreciate appreciated cinematography in that,
Yeah.
and just how like I learned like, oh my God, there is no way I could have
Yeah.
done. I mean, flying and like, yikes.
Yeah.
It was
They did a
intense.
really good job with the CG to put you in the in the
Yeah.
pilot seat in a lot of
Yeah.
points. You're like, yeah, no, maybe not for me.
Do you, do you ever use YouTube as to like go back and see what other people are saying about this from a reference standpoint or from a research standpoint? Is YouTube favorable for you at all in that, or is pretty much it just useless for you?
Um, I don't watch movie reviews or anything like that. If I'm doing an interview, kind of as I alluded to earlier, I specifically try to avoid um, looking up things about the real history if I have an expert that I can rely on, so I can ask them that question while we're recording. If it's something I'm doing individually, then yeah, there may be some things. I try to stick to um, reputable sources, a lot, and that's usually end up being more books and things like that. Not that there's not reputable people on YouTube, but it's also a lot more to sift through a lot of times. So
I do enjoy, I do enjoy the history podcast or the history episode on YouTube. If I can find some good ones, there's some really well done.
There are some
that are out there. I was just watching, this afternoon, an account of the Statue of Liberty.
Oh,
and I was like, oh, and I knew some, I'm from France, but I had forgotten about all that. Like, it took them forever to get the funding. This just didn't happen. Today we just pay for it. But then, like, the US government was like, yeah, there's no money for that. Like, we're going to have to, they had boxing matches in the United States. They would host boxing matches to help pay, because the US agreed to pay for the foundation. Like, we'll put the pedestal up.
Okay.
France, you pay for the actual statue type thing. Well, again, there wasn't money for that. It had to be raised. And so they did concerts and band things and parades, and they even toured the Statue of Liberty around, and you were, before it was erected, for people to see it, parts of it, not the whole thing. But it was just a different, I was like, oh yeah, that's right, it was a completely different day. We just somebody would have paid for that thing now, but the American people paid for that, out of entertainment dollars type thing. So out of all your episodes, any favorites stand out to you as you think about, like, man, I really like this one?
Is it cheap to say the one I'm currently working on? It's always the one I'm currently working on.
What's coming up? Tell folks, if folks haven't listened to you before, what kind of stuff do you have coming up?
Yeah, well, I've got the 3-part Pacific series. Episode 2 actually released as of recording this. It released today. Episode 3 will be out in a couple weeks, and then I've got the interview about At Eternity's Gate, which is the Vincent van Gogh biopic with Stephen Nafee. And then after that, I've got the Project Blue Book interview, and I've got a couple others that I'm close to, but until it's actually scheduled, then sometimes timing changes.
Do you think, for people listening to your podcast, better to come to the podcast having watched the movie or the series first and then listen, or the other way around?
I've heard some of both, where some people are like, well, I don't know if I want to watch the movie, and so I want to kind of get an idea of it beforehand. I will say I spoil every single movie. You're going to know how it ends. So there's spoilers, because we walk through the movie's timeline.
Spoilers for sure.
Yeah. So if you're okay with that, then cool. I try to set up in my questions, and one of the reasons why I do so much research watching the movie itself is I try to set up what's going on in the movie, because we know people usually aren't watching a movie while they're listening to a podcast. Usually are out and about, and you maybe haven't seen the movie in a while, or if at all. So I try to set up that around the question itself to give an idea of, here's what happened in the movie. Okay, how much of that actually happened?
Yeah, Jim Shoemaker, who had chimed in before. Jim, let us know in chat, what do you do? Do you watch the movie first and then listen to the podcast? I think I would watch it, then come to the podcast, then watch it again, like come back to it, and now hearing kind of, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I had the advantage, we joked about Lord of the Rings a little bit earlier, but when I watched Lord of the Rings, my wife had read the book twice. And so I had her whispering in my ear the whole time, like, okay, this is why this is happening. And at first it was kind of annoying, but after a while I'm like, oh, actually this is kind of helpful to get to kind of fill in some context. And I would think, watching it a second time after listening to the podcast, you might get that historical fill in where you're like, oh yeah, oh, now that makes sense why that happened in the movie that way, because of these events that were behind the scenes, where they combined them together. Don't you think?
Yeah, there's not that much history in Lord of the Rings, but I will say,
no. I'm meaning maybe like the Imitation Game, right? Oh, yeah. Where you get there's a way more Imitation Game in particular, way more to it than you can possibly show
Oh yeah.
in a
I learned
2-hour
so
movie,
much in
right?
that, just in the
Yeah.
recording. That was so much fun to do that episode. I will say, before we go into Imitation Game,
Yeah.
if you haven't yet, either watch the movie first or listen to the episode. I did an episode on the Tolkien biopic
Mm.
with John Garth, he wrote the definitive book on Tolkien and the Great Wars, his book that all about Tolkien during World War I. And so doing that episode, I learned a lot about him as an author, and how a lot of this stuff kind of influenced what you see in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all of his writing. So if you want to get kind of some of the history side of it,
Yeah.
that's not talking about Lord of the Rings movie, but it's talking about the biopic. So
Well, I think it's important. I mean, he was an interesting guy.
yeah,
I mean, he had a whole world
yeah.
in another language or
hmm
two locked up inside his head. And you
Oh,
think,
many languages. Yeah,
yeah, well, and we think of, Imitation Game, and we think of what was locked up there and all the, of solving that mystery and those
yeah.
puzzles and getting those kinds of things done. I really enjoyed that movie. I didn't listen to the review, or I didn't listen to your podcast on it. Close? Is it worth, like, is it historically, is it close at all? Do you remember?
Yeah, so it's focused more on Alan Turing
Mhm.
than Bletchley Park as a whole. So, I mean, obviously, Alan Turing was a very important
Right, right,
part of
right.
that. But so it in the episode, because I talked to the Mark Cotton, he's the producer for the official Bletchley Park podcast. So, went into a lot of detail around a lot of the stuff that they were doing there. Tolkien actually was invited to work at
Oh, wow.
Bletchley, so he's on the list, and one of the people that went to one of their code breaking classes.
Wow.
He ultimately decided not to, and wrote Lord of the Rings and stuff. So the world
Instead.
would be different if he had.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, they did a good job on some parts. Things like they were code breaking there. Some of the things they played up for drama, things like how every day at midnight the code books would change, and so everything they did was thrown out. Mark made a really good point that just because something is a few days old by the time they break it, that doesn't mean it's not helpful.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about troop movements, and especially the way, I didn't realize this until I interviewed him. The way that they broke a lot of that was through some of the most mundane messages. Like,
Mhm.
the Germans wouldn't send a message and saying, "Hey, we're going to be attacking this town on Friday at 8 a.m." But no, if you know that the captain of this unit needs, he even mentioned new underwear, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and he's requesting that something is sent here. Well, that probably means, if he's the captain, that probably means that they're going to be there,
right.
or that broke a lot of things because of the Luftwaffe, because they can't have hardwire connections,
Right,
right?
right.
So being
Yeah,
able to break it over the
yeah.
airwaves. So things like that, it's just a lot of stuff that doesn't really get talked about in the movie because it focuses more on Turing.
Mhm.
But it's all relevant historical context, I think.
I think one of the things I read, earlier today, I was actually reading your transcripts, which I almost never do, but I was in a spot where I couldn't listen to it and I wanted to kind of read. And I think one of the other things too was the movie makes a big deal about the moment when they figure out the Heil Hitler at the end, like
Oh
all
yeah,
of these.
yeah, the crypts, yeah,
And there were other crypts is a
yeah,
part of, like, the weather, like the
yeah,
weather became a crypt, right? And
yeah,
that, from that standpoint, there were others. So, but it again, that's one of those areas where it plays better in the movie. It's
right.
simpler,
It
right? More
is, and
more
it's a lot simpler. So that brings up a great point of, one of the differences that they did. It wasn't like there was just one code. Like,
right.
the Army had multiple codes, like the Navy had multiple codes, the Luftwaffe had multiple codes, and even within them, they units that are stationed in one area might use a code that's completely different than units stationed in another area. And so one of the biggest challenges that they had to do was to figure out which codes they're going to break,
Mm,
because you can't break every single code every single day. And so we have to decide, are we going to focus more on the Navy codes we going to focus more on the Army codes? How are we going to do that? And some of those decisions, you have to figure that out. But then some of those are going to be left behind. You don't break them for later until later, or you don't at all. You let them have to decide what to do. But
it is important. Have you gotten any feedback from your listeners where like they get upset that it's, these are entertainment? At the end of the day, we watch these movies. They're kind of made for entertainment. But some people may take them either a little too serious, or they take exception to the guest or what you guys are saying. But did you get any of that kind of feedback?
Oh yeah. I mean, you can't please everybody. That's for sure. In fact, the Imitation.
I mean, I do. Let's be clear. I please everybody, but I understand.
There's always an exception to the rule, though, right?
True story.
The Imitation Game episode, one of the reasons that one came about with Mark was because I actually covered the Imitation Game as a solo narrative episode, as episode number 3. And when I got in touch with Mark, we kind of started chatting back and forth. I was like, hey, would you be willing to come on and fact check that episode and make sure that I got things right? If not, we can correct it. And then we actually went through and covered a bunch of other stuff as well. And he's great. I mean, hey, he did. And there were some things even that, he'd point out and be like, yeah, that wasn't quite right. But when the movie came out in 2014, 2015, he's like, we didn't know that yet. We just uncovered that. So, there's still stuff being learned.
Yeah. It's a good, I think for some folks, maybe too much to go to a movie, then have it broken down. You're like, oh, you're ruining the fun.
Sure.
I kind of like both. I mean, I kind of like watching it for pure entertainment, then hearing like, oh, when I heard some of these things like with Bohemian Rhapsody, you're like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then I went and watched all the YouTube videos where they compared the actual live to the, to the movie. And I found it fascinating. One, it was a work of art. Like I was just like, oh my gosh, the talent involved in getting these exactly right. Well, not exactly, but pretty close to the same is pretty amazing. I don't know if that's for everybody.
No, it's not. And I mean, that's perfectly fine. I mean, not every podcast is for everybody. And
right. Well, I mean, this one is. This one is.
Let's be clear again, exceptions to every rule.
Dan, I told you. I told you in advance. All right, let's get back to 2 truths and a lie. Dan, let's review let's review those 3 items, and let's see. Chat room, we'll give you a second here to pick it. Okay. Let's roll through those again.
Okay. So number 1, my podcast is always streamed live. Number 2, I used to teach the artists who make movies and games. And number 3, I'm a full-time podcaster and I also teach online courses.
It should be easy for the live audience at this point. I
tried to work some of those in specifically. Yeah. I mean, it's more scripted on the show, but
you did nice. So chat room, we're looking for the lie. Which one of those was a lie? 1, 2, or 3? We'll give you kind of a second. As we're waiting for the chat room to chime in, Dan, if you were going to do any other kind of podcast, what do you think you'd do if you got a chance to do another one that's different? Would you do anything different?
On top of this or instead of?
Well, that's a good either way. I'll just say you had some extra time, so you got some extra time. I guess what I'm getting at, do you have a passion project of something you've always been thinking about that you'd like to do, and maybe you don't have the time, or if the time was made, you do it?
Honestly, the podcast was my passion project. Yeah. And so, I mean, I try to put as much time as I can into, building that up bigger. Each episode, it's been a while since I've actually done the math on it to do an average, but it's probably 35 to 40 hours on average for an episode.
And it's full time for you, right? This is what you do now. Besides, you got some training.
Well, we have the 2 truths and a lie. That's
right.
Do we want?
That's right. Hold on. We'll figure. Hold that question. You're right. That was in there. That was in there. So you're okay. Like right now, no, you're good doing. You're kind of good doing what you're doing, and there's nothing necessarily calling your name out there. Like
not as far as podcast is concerned. I mean, I certainly do other things, and have hobbies on the side for sure that kind of get me out of this room.
Yeah.
But
it is weird though. You're probably working a lot from home. You probably don't, based on the way you answered the weather question, maybe you should get outside a little bit more often.
I try to go outside every day and go for a walk, and it's actually something that I do. So I listen to every episode as kind of a QA thing.
Yeah.
It's perfect time. Go for a walk,
Yeah.
listen to the episode, find the errors that I made in editing or something, and
yeah, I used to do more of that when I had the time. I'd listen to my own stuff, ask the podcast coach, and this one and others, the stuff I was doing for Gallup. But I'm just not in my car ever anymore for the most part, and I'm listening to other people's podcasts because I don't want to just listen to me.
Yeah,
like I hear enough of me. Like, okay, enough. Stop it, Jim. You've got enough. Okay. So we Brian checked in with number 2. He's saying the lie. I saw that a little bit earlier too. Number 2, Dan. Which one was the lie?
The lie is number 1. I actually did used to teach the artists who make movies and games. Worked at a company where I taught 3D software and VFX, and fluid dynamics was kind of my specialty. But also, as I kind of mentioned, I do teach Photoshop courses as well as project management courses on top of doing the podcast. So I am a full-time podcaster. I also teach courses, and my podcast is all pre-recorded. no live.
That was the one you told me that before we hit recording, but we didn't really say it.
Right.
The other 2 you talked about, we kind of inferred, you kind of inferred to it, but
I didn't come out and say that, but I mentioned it's recorded, and I mentioned, editing, and then the QA thing there too. I mean,
I know. Well, I may add that may become a regular segment here on Home Gadget Geeks. That's kind of a fun. I heard you do that.
I didn't come up with it. I mean,
I know.
It's a search for 2 truths and a lie. It's a thing.
It's a regular thing, but I thought that was kind of cool. It's like, oh, yeah, that's interesting. We Cigar Authority, which I listen to on Saturday mornings, they do a versus segment, and they have to guess trivia about, hey, Marlon Brando, who did this, was born on this day in what year? And it's the day, it's that day. And so then they all go around. Well, my wife, who doesn't care about cigars for the most part, I mean, she'd rather not smoke them, but I do. She said she loves, that's her favorite part of the show. She'll hear me, playing the show. So maybe I need to add some, trivia in to Home Gadget Geeks to get some add a little excitement.
It's a fun way to kind of get people to pay attention and to refer back to it later on. So hopefully people listen to the entire episode. They have a reason to stick around to the end. It's actually probably for interviews, it's probably the most time consuming part that for me writing that, because it requires that I have to go through as I'm editing, I'll find what the 2 truths and a lie are. And then I also have to,
because you record those after the fact, right?
Oh yes. The introduction. And when I talk to the guests, I don't take up any other extra time.
Not like I did.
Well, no.
I'm just joking.
No, I mean, like a lot of them are, they're in a rush, or they're,
right on. No, right on.
Give them their time. I just record, and because it's not live, I record all that afterwards anyway. I wouldn't know what we're going to talk about to know that he or she does mention that there, this didn't happen or something like that. So but it sometimes it can be a little tricky to come up with something that's in there that actually gets talked about in a specific way like that.
Right. Right. No, it's fun. Thanks for I sprung that on you with about 10 minutes. Before I was like, hey, can we do 2 truths and a lie? And you're like, yeah, I think we can come up with it. So thanks for pulling out. Thanks for saying yes. When I threw this out to our Patreon subscribers, and you were like, well, I don't know if I have a lot to share, but I'd like to cut, I'd do it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I always listen. If you get that far, I think everybody has stuff to share. So I don't ever turn down for the most part. Well, Uyghur, I turn him down from time to time, but for the most part, thanks for, you had so much stuff to be honest, we could have spent most of the show just talking about and geeking out on the technology that's behind you.
We can do that again later.
So thanks. Just a reminder, Dan LeFebvre, based on a true story podcast.com. And Dan, thanks for, it's kind of you support the coffee pour. Well, you support the mug that I pour the coffee into on Ask the Podcast Coach. Has that been good? Do you think that's been, this is a little risk in asking this, but do you think it's been good for the podcast to have us talk about that on on Ask the Podcast Coach?
I've had some people that have reached out. Glenn Hebert reached out and he's like, "Oh, I listened to your show because I heard it on there."
Good. That's good.
I don't really check stats a
You
lot,
yeah,
so
I don't either. Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So
well, I appreciate you doing that. Appreciate it's been a fun for me. I've been interested, you know, obviously as we talked about this tonight, I've been interested in the topics that you cover, and have tried to go in and listen to some as I can, as I have time for. It's very, very interesting. So if you need another podcast to listen to, maybe on some weeks when Home Gadget Geeks is off, you can head out to based on a true story podcast.com and just get subscribed to it. I think it's a nice fit. I think it's an even nicer fit for my audience than here on Home Gadget Geeks than for Ask the Podcast Coach. That is, I mean, that's a great audience, but we have a lot. I think we have a lot of history guys and maybe a few ladies in here who will find it interesting, who haven't found it before. Jim Shoemaker, thanks for chiming in during the program and letting us know you listen as well. And if you got some feedback for Dan's, jump over there, listen to a few. I'm sure there's a way to contact you. What's the best way if folks sort of follow you on these things? What's the best way to do that, Dan?
I've got a follow link right at the top of the website, based on a true story podcast.com. So everything's there. My contact information is there.
Super. About 8,000 ways to subscribe to the podcast too.
Yeah, these days. Yeah. I do want to say thanks, Jim, for the support as well. That's you mentioned some of those more fictional movies over on Patreon. I cover fictional movies, so like little like Jurassic Park, you know, or Pirates of the Caribbean or things like that. You know, there's some little they're mini-sodes, you know, 5-10 minutes long, so it's not that much, but
something right.
Just
and those
fun.
Those are for your Patreon folks.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, good. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on. Always great to spend time with you, and always great to just spend some time here together. We'll have to have you back at some point when maybe we could, if you get a podcast that is really tech heavy type deal, just flag me and say, hey, I want to come on Home Gadget Geeks and talk about it. We can maybe have you on, talk about it, kind of dig into it a little bit, because I'm always interested. I wouldn't mind. I was a little overwhelmed in digging into because we were trying to cover the whole channel, but I'd love to, if you've got one, like I said, if you've got one that's a little tech heavy, that'd be kind of fun to bring it on to a dual show. So let me know.
If you have any recommendations for what that might be, or if you ever want to talk about the real tech in Star Trek. I haven't looked at
the tech predictions, right? Like, what did they predict?
That actually happened.
Yeah.
That is an episode I've kind of been mulling around in the back of my head that I think would be fun to do sometime.
Cool. Well, great. Well, thanks for coming on. I'm going to let you go while I wrap this thing up. No need for you to hang around while I do all the closing blah 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 stuff on here. So if you want to drop, you're welcome to. But Dan, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me
on. Couple reminders here on the way out. One, if you want to support this show, you can send us. You can head over to theaverageguy.tv/Patreon and do that. There's some Patreon subscribers. We're gonna. Dan does that, and that's why I had him on. And it just prompted. I sent him a note, said, "Hey, Patreon supporters, you guys want to come on the show?" And Dan said, "Yeah." So appreciate that. If you want to join us in the Discord group, theaverageguy.tv/Discord is a way to get that done. If you want to leave us a message, and I'm hesitant on whether I'm going to take this away or leave it, but homegadgetgeeks.com, I was spending some time with Mark DeCoates over, he's kind of a podcast advisor, and he was like, you really ought to direct homegadgetgeeks.com to Home Gadget Geeks, and it lands on Podpage, and we have a nice way to leave a message, but nobody leaves messages. But if you wanted to do that, maybe I'm rethinking that, but maybe in the short term, homegadgetgeeks.com, leave us a message. We'll play it right here on the show. You can send me an email, and many of you do appreciate that, to get the feedback from you guys. Jim at theaverageguy.tv. You can find me on Twitter, although better conversation on Discord. I'm not going to lie. Discord's probably the place where it's happening from a community standpoint, but the average guy, let's see, what is it? Jim at theaverageguy.tv if you want to send me an email. And then, of course, we want to thank Christian for his support of Home Gadget Geeks and the Average Guy Network. If you want to get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust, plans start as little as $10, and you're going to probably get the best hosting service in the business. from a guy that we know. So if you haven't checked it out yet, plans start as little as $10. You can head out to maplegrovepartners.com. Been hosting Home Gadget Geeks for since the beginning. So 11 years. And we thank Christian for his support. And he continues to, I keep thinking he's going to quit at some point, but he keeps building that infrastructure out there. And they're doing some great stuff as well. We are live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, out here at theaverageguy.tv/live. If you haven't subscribed, do that on YouTube. Get in here, get in the Discord group. We'd love to have you. We're friendly tech, as I've said before, and always a good time with those that are around. We'll be back next week. I have no idea who's coming, but it will be somebody who's interesting. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody. Dan, thanks for coming in. We are live at the moment, but thanks for coming in. I'm going to tell the live folks, I got a bunch of things to do yet tonight, so I'm going to let them go. But Dan, if you could hang tight for me one more second.
Sure.
Live folks. Oh, by the way, Joe said, great show.
Oh,
so,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian as well. So good. I'm glad you guys enjoyed that. I had a ton of fun. Jim said, good to see you on Home Gadget Geeks. Yeah. His worlds collided, which is super cool. Glad you guys enjoyed it. You know Home Gadget Geeks. You guys, these listeners, they're out there every single week, and they never know what they're going to get, but it's really what I want to do. So I appreciate you guys. We'll see you back here next Thursday. And I think I got